Hey, it's Serge from Aleka Talks. Join us today as we talk about carbon capture, utilization and storage, carbon lock-in, infrastructure needs, emissions, and how are we going to meet net zero emissions. Stick around and find out how you are going to be a leader of our sustainable future. So getting grounded with CCUS. So pun intended, we're trying to, inject carbon dioxide into the ground. So it's really getting grounded with CCUS today. So why invest in CCUS and can it make a difference? So learning outcomes. I've taken my training on how to be a teacher and how to do things. So this is kind of the learning outcomes. Today, I want you to gain a new perspective, perhaps, or gain some perspective around energy, emissions, and this new term, it was new to me, called carbon lock-in, that we need to understand as a society. We need to understand carbon lock-in, okay? I also want you to understand the basic terms around CCUS and the scale of the projects needed. And by scale, I think you'll be overwhelmed. I certainly was when I started looking at these numbers. So, you guys answered the poll question. Can you walk me through the poll? Can someone tell me what happened to the poll? What was the poll questions?
So
greater than 90%. So 12 people voted greater than 90%. Okay, well, I'm happy. I'm happy because it's actually 95%. 95. 95% of Malaysia's energy consumption comes from fossil fuels. So that's going to play into the future of what Malaysia does, but it also plays into this thing called carbon lock-in. Now, how much was the next question? What percentage of the global energy? Correct, global energy. So what was it? Based on BP stats, I think I can see how you guys voted, 84%. It's pretty close to 84. Yes, it's 83% thereabouts based on BP stats. So I always like to look at that report. There's a report by BP comes out every year, and they've been doing it, for 50 years or something. I read it every year. I do like the information they share. So please, if you get a chance, there's a link. I think the team will send a link through on the chat. Please, if you get a chance, read that report. It's a lot of fun to understand where we get our energy and what we're going to do in the near future. Okay? What else? What is carbon lock-in? Did you get a chance at all when you saw my video, perhaps on LinkedIn or on our social media, where I mentioned carbon lock-in? And did you start thinking about what that is? And basically, it's defined as our infrastructure is designed for many years, and our infrastructure is designed around fossil fuels. Let's just admit it, okay? And our buildings, you can see here, our buildings are designed for 80 years. So of course, we're going to be using fossil fuels for a long time, unless we do something very dramatic and very costly, which a lot of us can't afford. So we'll be getting into that in a minute. But I put all my references here. This one's from Carbon Lock-in Definition. It's from WRI.org. We'll put the link in the chat. Thank you very much. It's there on the chat if you want to learn more. Some reports to read. And the team here at Aleka, myself included, we must have read, 100 reports on this. And I'm pulling out today, I'll be pulling out some highlights from those reports to give you a perspective. So again, carbon lock-in is the fact that we use fossil fuels to deliver our energy, to deliver our way of life, and that's within our infrastructure that is designed for decades, all right? Even you have a car most likely, or you use a car, that car is designed, you're gonna keep that car going for 10 years, maybe 20 years. If you can afford to change it, would you instantly buy an EV? Would you instantly buy an electric vehicle? That's up to you, but often there's none available and there's no infrastructure available to charge that vehicle at the moment, but it's coming soon, certainly in Malaysia. So Carbon lock-in, again, it relates to our infrastructure and how it's built to design for decades. The next one I want you to put a little bit of perspective here again is if you look at electricity for the past 25 years, and I'm going to look at it from Malaysia and Indonesia point of view because that's where I live in Malaysia, but also it's a growing nation, big families, and everyone's moving up into the middle class very rapidly, okay? So if you look at the electricity demand and consumption by Malaysia and Indonesia for the past 25 years, the growth has been phenomenal. You see here, Malaysia has gone from less than 50 back in 1990 to over 170 today, okay? And this is in terawatt hours per year. So how are we delivering that? We are delivering that predominantly with fossil fuels, right? We just went through that. 95% fossil fuels. And there's a little small wedge at the top where we have hydro, we have some solar and some wind. But in reality, for the past 10 years, we've built a lot of infrastructure, locking in that fossil fuel lock-in, the carbon lock-in, and delivering our energy growth. Indonesia even more so. Indonesia has been an amazing place. I used to live in Indonesia, I don't know, 15 years ago. And the growth, the real middle class strength has been phenomenal. So when we talk about carbon lock-in, it's all about how are we delivering our energy to society today, and how is that going to last, the infrastructure going to last. And right now, across Southeast Asia, the vast majority of our fossil fuel infrastructure, this is in gigawatts here, but the whole idea with this chart is to show that much of our infrastructure across Southeast Asia is less than 10 years old. And if we were to take one thing away from this slide, is that the growth in electrical demand is phenomenal, and it's real. It's real, and I know we may have dipped a little bit in 2020 and 2021. I believe it was a very unique situation. Everybody knows why that situation exists. But going forward, when demand comes back, the growth will still be there. We're still having wants and needs to become stronger in our middle class and certainly grow our gross domestic product and grow our energy needs. So if you were to compare the Southeast Asia carbon lock-in, I think we have a pile of 10-year-old infrastructure, and we want it to last for 40 years. Little different. It's a little different in North America, where the vast majority of the infrastructure is over 40 years old. You know, we had our baby booms. I'm Canadian originally, and we had our baby booms back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And that's when we had a massive energy demand, energy growth. Now the word is efficiency and cut back and retire those old coal plants and replace them with solar, wind, renewable, natural gas. That's the other story. We're replacing a lot of our energy demands with natural gas. Again, lowering our carbon footprint. But bottom line is all our infrastructure on, in this case, coal and thermal plants in North America are 40 years old, as opposed to Southeast Asia, which is 10. And that'll come in, just remember this plot. Southeast Asia, kind of 10-year-old infrastructure. North America, 40-year-old infrastructure. And as we go forward, we're going to talk about what to do and how to reach these net zero emission targets by 2050 set by the UN essentially. So to compare the electrical generation and the growth in that, and now I'm just looking at straight CO2 emissions and the growth of those CO2 emissions. Now here's Malaysia on the left, and it's grown again from under 100, and we're at about 250 million tons per year of CO2. Okay, that's just Malaysia. million tons per year of CO2. You go to Indonesia, it's gone from 100 as well, and it's up over 600 now. All right, that's the growth in the CO2 emissions by the nation. Now, they're on the same scale. They're each scaled to 700, and they're each scaled 1990 to 2019. But one question to you: what is the population of Malaysia? You can write in the chat. Anybody know what the population of Malaysia is? And how about the population of Indonesia? What is the population of Indonesia? Yeah? You're welcome to put it in the chat. Anybody know? 32 million in Malaysia. Thank you, Jason. Well done. How about Indonesia? What is the population of Indonesia? About 200 million. Okay, cool. All right. So I Googled it just now. It's a little over 32 million. You round it to about 33 based on the first Google hit. Indonesia, the first Google hit, gave me 270 million. Yeah? So they're a lot steeper. Indonesia is a lot steeper. A lot more people are clamoring into getting into that middle class. And Malaysia might be a little bit ahead of the curve on the middle class, but you can see that if you were to divide up some numbers here, Malaysia is a lot more energy intensive as an average Malaysian versus Indonesia, which has what? Not 10 times, maybe 9 times, 9x, 9 times the population, but their emissions are only double or so. So you can see the challenge here in emission growth. Okay, so this is the goal of this slide, is to show you how our carbon emissions are growing across Southeast Asia, and also our energy demands, they're growing. So to meet this energy demand, we've built a lot of infrastructure and kind of locked in that infrastructure for probably 40 years. That takes us well beyond, our targets of 2050. So how will you meet, net zero emission targets? So this is where I'm trying to get you some perspective, okay? I hope there's a lot of numbers. Obviously, the takeaways are growth on energy, and the takeaways are growth on CO2 emissions. It's going to continue to grow. What I ask for you now is to kind of walk with me and maybe put it on a global perspective. So the next slides, I talk about comparing developed nations or more advanced nations as far as economies versus developing. So you get this term called, there's 2 new terms introduced on this slide. Can you see them? One's called net NZE, which is the net zero scenario, where you have zero carbon emissions, net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Okay, 2050 is not that far away, 30 years, right? 30 years. And I just mentioned that a lot of our infrastructure is built for 40 years. The buildings built for 80 years. Every building around you, even the new builds, were designed probably 5-6 years ago, and now they're built today. So we're going to have a talk on buildings in December, and so stay tuned for that one, how we're going to deal with buildings in the future. But this slide, what I'm trying to tell you now is that the infrastructure of your coal-fired plants, in this case, are 10 years or less, versus kind of the States or Canada is in the same boat. A lot of Europe is in the same boat. All their coal-fired plants are over 30, 40 years old. So to meet a net zero emissions target by 2050, the world, in a way, the UN, in a way, is asking all of us to retire our infrastructure early. In this case, they're asking essentially EMDE. What is EMDE? Emerging market and developing countries. Yeah, they're asking emerging markets and developing countries to retire their infrastructure early. Okay, I don't know how you feel about that, but you usually build something for 40 or 50 years. And that's the economies of scale and certainly the size of things. Now, more advanced economies that have built this infrastructure in the 70s and 80s anyway, they're being asked to retire them early as well. But in reality, early for North America and Europe is 40 years, 40, okay? So now, everyone on the call, all of you, I'm asking you to maybe put this into perspective. You've built, as a nation, infrastructure, and you've locked in, I guess, that addiction to fossil fuels, just like we did in North America. We locked in our addiction 40 years ago. And now that we're asked to retire them early, we can, in a way, because we've profited from those investments over 40 years. However, Southeast Asia, I'm not sure about how fair it is to ask you to cut the life of your infrastructure in half to meet global targets. So again, just asking you to put it into perspective. I have the references for all these things. I'll put them in the chat here. Yeah, that's the report there. This is coming from page 59 of that report. So if you want to read more, read those reports. Very interesting read, and they break it down pretty good. Okay, so understanding 20 years of energy. This is a great plot. I'll try to walk you through it. It's coal consumption over the past 20 years, going from 2000 to 2020. Again, this is from, I think this is from BP. This is from the BP report. I apologize, I didn't put the reference, but I think this is from the BP report, BP stat, 2021. Okay, it comes out in 2021. It's based on the last numbers, which are 2020. Okay, the big yellow is how much coal Asia Pacific uses. Okay, now it looks a bit deceptive. It looks like Asia Pacific is coming down, but Asia Pacific is not coming down. Asia Pacific is always increasing. And what's coming down is the former Soviet Union, Europe, South and Central America, and North America. We've all been slowly retiring our coal plants. Fair enough, our coal plants are old, and we've replaced them with natural gas. Natural gas became very cheap when we started expanding a lot of our fracking, expanding a lot of the infrastructure across North America and South America for the unconventionals. And we all of a sudden had tons and tons and tons of supply around natural gas. And so then we transitioned off coal into natural gas. Now, as opposed to the Trump believers who said we're going to bring back coal, they never did bring back coal because it just financially didn't make sense. It was just cheaper to go to natural gas. So it was purely an economic decision to not upgrade the coal plants and build new, efficient natural gas energy electrical generating plants, because natural gas was cheaper, it was abundant, and it was very much more efficient and easy to scale up and down. That'll come in a minute, where you can scale natural gas up and down easier, and hence if you got solar and wind coming in intermittently, it's easier to run a natural gas plant for generating electricity to pick up the slack. But very few countries can afford that in reality. Very few countries can afford to build double the infrastructure where you have solar and wind, and if it's a windy and sunny day, you scale back your fossil fuels, and then on the days where it's calm or cloudy or at night, you scale up your fossil fuels. So in reality, you have double the infrastructure. Very few countries can afford that. And we don't have storage at scale yet. But I just wanted to mention this, that Southeast Asia, the real driver of the growth in energy and low cost, scalable, efficient, abundant energy is coming from coal. Now, renewables are important. I'm not anti-renewables, okay? Don't get me wrong. We need to invest all the way and get off fossil fuels eventually. However, to put it into perspective, this is renewables consumption in exajoules. Now you can see the scales aren't the same. This is 30, which would be down here. I'll show you that in a minute. But North America, South America, Europe, they've done some great investments. The yellow here is Asia Pacific. It's dominated by China. China's been hungry for energy for decades, and they've been meeting it with a lot of solar and wind. Okay, they've also built a pile of coal plants, but they have invested in solar and wind, and they're the leaders in the world. The most solar being installed, I believe, is in China. Okay, so please, it's an important part of the business. However, if you were to put it into perspective, just compared to coal, this is how the scale looks. This is the exact same plot, but plotted on top of the coal. So you can see the challenge here. This has a lot of lock-in. This is dominated by North America retiring their coal plants, which are over 40 years old. This lock-in up here in yellow is really locked in the past 10 years. And you're going to be asked, you're going to be pushed, you're going to be requested, please retire it early. Don't know how you feel about that, but educate yourself and read these reports. You'll gain a new perspective on all this. The other things, emissions, to get some perspective, is what are the global CO2 emissions, right? These are the anthropogenic CO2 emissions in gigatons. 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 How many zeros is that? How many zeros in a giga? I'll ask that question. Someone in the chat, help me out. 10 to the 9th. Okay, there you go. So 10 to the 9th. 10 to the 9th. Does anybody remember what Malaysia's millions of tons of emissions annually was? Does anybody remember? It was a few slides back. Anybody remember what Malaysia's emissions were? How about Indonesia's? How about Indonesia's? How many millions of tons does Indonesia emit annually? Okay. 600 for, hey, Martin, hey, Maury, good, 1480. I'm not sure what 1480 is, but 600 for Indonesia and about 200 and some for Malaysia, right? So together, not even 1 gigaton combined. Okay, 270. Oh, was it 270 for Malaysia and 600 for Indonesia? Very good, thank you. But those were in millions of tons. Okay, and they represent about 300 million people, right? 300 million people, not even 1 gigaton in this case. So what I ask you now is to put it into perspective. This is 10 to the 9th, and it's about 32 or 33 gigatons, right? So was that one of the questions we had as well on the poll? How did we do on the poll? You guys remember what the poll was? Do you guys remember what your answer was? Well, here it is. And this is from the IEA. This was published recently as well on October 13th. This is part of the report, the World Energy Outlook report. It was just published yesterday, okay? The other things that are on this chart is the history, okay? So we've been increasing our CO2 emissions pretty much every year, except for some years where we had a massive economic shutdown, essentially in 2008. And then we had a massive economic shutdown here recently as well, and we all know the reasons. However, demand is coming back for energy, and so are our emissions. Now, STEPS, APS, SDS, and NZE. Does anybody know what those terms are? NZE, you should know, that's the net zero emissions by 2050. That's our goal, right? That's our goal. In fact, Malaysia has signed up for that goal as well, and so has most countries in the developed world. However, you have another thing called STEPS, APS, and SDS. Anybody know what those mean? STEPS, it means stated, the stated policy scenario. So as stated by governments. The other one, APS, is announced pledges. They're maybe not committed, but they are announced that we pledge to reduce. Now, pledging is different than putting it into policy and having an action plan. So an announcement necessarily doesn't have an action plan. SDS, anybody know what SDS means? SDS down here, it means the Sustainable Development Scenario. So if you're part of the UN Global Compact, or you've signed up to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, you should be in line to bring your carbon emission down as a family, as a business, as a country, bring it down, and you should be able to meet this if you follow their goals. So big challenge ahead of us, in that Southeast Asia certainly has been growing in economy, growing in energy demands, and they have this massive carbon lock-in. The world is trying to get to zero by 2050, and yet there's this carbon lock-in issue, in my opinion. So what's the solution? Maybe we have the solution today. What is the solution? Well, it's going to have to be a multi-pronged solution, I assure you. But one of the big ones is CCUS. Okay? So let's talk about that for now. So if you have any questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat. If you have any comments, you're welcome to put them in the chat, and we'll have a bit of an open discussion a little later. But basically, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. What's carbon capture and storage? CCS. It's where you separate the CO2 from some kind of process and you re-inject it, typically in the subsurface, or maybe you get it into a solid of some kind and get it out of the atmosphere. Okay, sequestration, you'll hear that word as well. Sequestration, they throw them around. They're all one and the same. In this way, sequestration is you're trying to lock it away. You're trying to get it out of the atmosphere and lock it away. For us, oil and gas industry, we pull hydrocarbons out of the ground that were there for millions of years, and now we're putting CO2 back, which is going to stay there for millions of years as well. Okay, so we took it out of there efficiently, we can put it back efficiently. Utilization is another one, CCU. So utilization is where you take a CO2 stream and you use it somehow to get some kind of commercial value. You can use it in oil and gas production, enhanced oil and gas production, or you can use it to make concrete, steel, those kind of things. So utilization is a very small number, unfortunately. Whenever you break down the numbers, you can't use it that much. And it's great if you can. It's wonderful if you can, but the volumes are quite small. So examples of CCUS in the oil and gas industry, again, this is from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, right? IPCC, again, another great report. I urge you to read that one as well, on how do you sequester or store carbon dioxide. So obviously there's a number of ways to do it, injecting it in aquifers, injecting it in depleted oil fields. Here they have an example where they're injecting it on one side of the field and producing hydrocarbons on the other side. Here they're injecting it in the coal seams. Bottom line is you need a little bit of infrastructure and you need a large volume, and you can sequester or store CO2 underground, just like where the hydrocarbons came from. But in this case, it's much, much bigger, because you're getting CO2 from coal plants, you're getting CO2 from industrial processes, and you need to have a very limited amount of infrastructure to keep the costs down. You know, when we talk about oil and gas fields, it may be coming from, 1,000 oil and gas fields and 5 wells each. So you have 5,000 wells are coming into a refinery, and that's what your feedstock is. But in reality, to send it back to all 5,000, that's not going to work. It's too costly. So you need to send it back to preferably one location, and that's where you're going to store it. So that's the challenge, that you need infrastructure to store the CO2 and get it to a certain location, and then you need to inject massive amount of volume. So Right now we've been studying Southeast Asia for a while, and we're looking at aquifers and re-injecting in aquifers, and then you'll see it done in North America, in Canada and Weyburn project for EOR, in Norway for an aquifer injection at Sleipner, and then in Australia into an aquifer with Gorgon. Okay, so there is some projects, and I'll show you that now. But basically, invest in CCUS at large scale. It can't be something small. It's got to be huge in order to take advantage of the economies of scale and take advantage of new investments in energy. Obviously, the older infrastructure, you're going to have that carbon lock-in for 40 years potentially. But I think with some innovation, and certainly with CCUS, we can reduce our emissions. So I firmly believe that. Talk to us if you need any more information. But decarbonizing our infrastructure is possible, and CCUS is I think is the key. So another report that just came out on October 12th from the Global CCS Institute is, you know, the operational, in construction, advanced development, and early development CCS projects around the world in millions of tons. Okay, so back in 2010, there was a lot of talk about CCS. Okay, and a lot of projects were planned. However, what happened is in 2014 and 15, oil price crashed, didn't it? Oil price crashed, and all those projects were basically led by the energy industry. So the money dried up in a way. And now, what, oil prices are back up, aren't they? So now we have a little more money. Governments are a little wealthier. So now we're back, and we need a massive amount of carbon capture here. So right now, today, operational, we have around 40 million tons per year, 40 million tons per year, right? So with aspiration to get probably another 100 million tons operational here soon. So it's great, it's a start, it's a move in the right direction, right? However, can you guys put a little perspective around this? What's your perspective, right? This is globally, how much we're sequestering or how much we're storing, and we've got real hard plans, fixed plans for 140. And you know what our emissions is. Our emissions are what? You guys remember what our emissions are? Yeah? 2021 anthropogenic emissions, or in gigatons, we talked about. How much is that in millions of tons? You guys remember? It's about 33,000 million tons, or 33 gigatons in 2021 is what we're estimating. And today we're storing or sequestering about 40 out of 33,000. Okay, so it's a challenge. It's a challenge. But just remember this number, 33 gigatons, okay? 33 or 33,000. So the Paris Agreement, 2015, have you guys managed to read that report? It's a great report. It's not very long. But if you look at the aim...
Serge, before you move on to this slide, there's one question for you, right? So Mr. Astomo has asked you, when do you think this will be implemented in Asia? Not sure how it goes in Malaysia in terms of regulation, but to get it supported, cost recoverable if you like, from Indonesian government seems a long way ahead in the future. Without any government support, as any other green energy materials, I don't think it will go anywhere. Your opinions?
Actually, Indonesia has just announced, BP just announced that in Irian Jaya, they'll be sequestering some CO2, right? I mean, you know that. They're going to be utilizing it. It's going to be an enhanced gas recovery system where they inject CO2 from their plant, the LNG plant, and they'll be trying to get more gas out of the ground. So it's actually an EGR, or enhanced gas recovery project. I don't know how many millions of tons it will be, but it's like it's a couple million tons a year. So Indonesia has one project sanctioned. Okay, it's an EGR project, an enhanced gas recovery one. In my opinion, what my opinion is, I think we have to do something, and probably Indonesia, it'll be right around coal. In my opinion, we should be trying to sequester some of those coal emissions. You guys have so much coal and you have so much demand growth that you'll be seeing more and more coal plants. I think I read somewhere you guys have 20 more coal-fired plants ready to start or on the books to get developed. So your carbon lock-in is there for 40 years. I don't think it's fair to ask you to retire that infrastructure early, but everyone across Southeast Asia needs to start thinking about CCUS, and there is projects started. Again, Indonesia, BP has started, so it starts with one, and then you'll have 10, and then you'll have 1,000. Okay, so there'll be some economies of scale, of course, but I believe, you're asking me what I believe, what I think. My opinion is yes. Big companies are looking at this seriously. Big companies are investing, and I got another couple slides on that. Petronas is investing in Malaysia. Malaysia has made the commitment and to be net zero by 2050. Petronas has made some commitments as well. I think Pertamina will eventually make commitments. However, your coal-fired plants, what's the solution? And I think you need to marry the oil and gas industry in Indonesia with your coal-fired electrical generation plants. That's my opinion. Thanks for the question, Estomo. Thank you very much. I believe it will be. I believe it will be. I think it will happen. Something will happen. Thanks for that. And again, yeah, Kushwan, thank you. Yes, ESG, the environmental social governance will dominate. Remember, every country across Southeast Asia has multinational companies. So they will be making commitments globally. And even if they're operating, doesn't matter where they're operating, they will have to bring up their game with respect to CO2 emissions. Okay? So the Paris Agreement, make finance flows consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. Okay, so that's one of the main aims. So that's why CCUS has become really important lately. I think everyone is gonna jump on board with this. This was in 2015, and we're seeing it across all levels of government, private industry, consulting firms. Everybody's going to try to make this happen. Of course, at Aleka, we provide the tools, training, and expertise to do this. Please think of us next time you need someone to come in and maybe do a training course or maybe consult on a vision of where you need to be with respect to CCUS. Think of us. The other one I wanted to announce, you guys asked about announcements or asked about what I think. This is an important one here. ExxonMobil has announced back in April, I don't know if you read, but in April of this year, they announced that they wanted $100 billion to build one of the biggest, if not the biggest to date, carbon capture and storage, where they take everything along the Gulf of Mexico coast, mostly along the river there, where they take the largest industrial emitters along the Houston shipping channel. Okay, this is a big one. Now, how much CO2 do you think they can sequester or store for $100 billion? This is USD, right? And it's ExxonMobil. They don't do small things. ExxonMobil, it's always big. You know, it's Texas. You ever been to Texas? Everything's big in Texas. So please, what do you think? How many million tons do you think they will sequester per year with this project? Take a look. You know, you can study it, but basically they will be working to get 100 million tons per year of CO2 injected offshore Gulf of Mexico. 100 million tons for $100 billion. Okay? And they're so serious about this that they actually want to do a 50. They want to be halfway there by 2030. Perspective, right? Perspective. 100 million tons. It's a lot. It's great. It's a lot. But we need hundreds of these projects around the world. Hundreds of them. So you can think about how much investment that will be. If you need 100 billion to do 100 million tons, you can think about 100 projects like this. Okay, so let's take a look. I'm nearing the end here. I know I just wanted to give you some perspective. Forecasts from 2015. Okay, so they had these 3 forecasts from 2015, which I always like to look back and see how good we are at forecasting. Have you ever done that? Go back 10 years and see what the forecast was. I'm always curious. But basically in 2015, they had these 3 trajectories. One was kind of the current policy status quo, where they would be in 2020. One was a new policy scenario, and one was getting on this trajectory, the 450 scenario, which is the net zero emissions trajectory back in 2015. And guess
Sir,
You're frozen. Sir,
what? The gray, or the actual carbon emissions here,
you're frozen for a while.
is what actually is.
Yeah,
I
you're
was
back.
frozen. Am I back now? All right. Sorry, I don't know what's going on with the internet. It happens. Okay, so the actual is in the dashed lines, yeah? Actual in the dashed lines, and we all know what happened in 2020, but in reality, where is the CO2 emissions going to be in 2022, 2023? Are we back on this trajectory, or can we get it down? So this is from the BP stats on the energy report from July 2021. Okay, so again, where are we today? We're probably coming back with a vengeance, back around 33 in 2021. In 2022, we may be higher just because our thirst for energy has come back. Okay, so my final slide: to meet this net zero emission target on CCUS, we need to add a lot more. We're sitting here. We're sitting in 2020, and on the books, remember, we're only sequestering about 40 million tons, 40. And we've got under construction or planned 139, up to 139. That's where we sit now. Now, ExxonMobil has made, ExxonMobil has made an announcement for another 100. Another 100. Now, that's not in this number because it's not actually approved yet. But the moment they do, then we'll be at 239. We need to get to 1799 by 2030 and 7740 by 2050. So a little bit of perspective for you. Now remember what we're emitting, right? Everybody remembers what we're emitting. What are we emitting? We're emitting about 33. Okay, 33 gigatons. And here it's about 7.7 gigatons we need to sequester. And in 30 years, by 30 years from now, we have built and have the technology to sequester or store 7.7 gigatons, right? So just a little bit of perspective for you. Aleka, myself, I would love to be involved in this, because especially for Southeast Asia, because I believe the carbon lock-in is real. I think the demand growth is very real, and we can do something. We can do something with our fossil fuel addiction. We can get it back underground. So there's some added benefits to CCUS, you know, and this is kind of my closing part. You're going to improve the air quality. I know we talk about electric vehicles, and we're just transferring from petroleum over to coal or over to natural gas. But in reality, you'll get better air quality in your cities if you could electrify everything and then maybe sequester that CO2. The carbon lock-in, if you have the infrastructure for fossil fuels, converting to CCS can certainly help you recover your costs on your carbon lock-in infrastructure and extend the life of that. Retiring it early is going to be very costly. The scale of the projects. CCUS is huge. It'll generate jobs. It generate a tremendous amount of investment. I think that's going to be a benefit to societies. And carbon tax credits. As you know, every company is multinational, and we've all agreed, as governments go, to share carbon credits, carbon taxes. So there might be a benefit for Southeast Asia to incorporate CCS and have it paid for by companies or countries abroad. Okay, so that's something we need to really look at and take seriously. So there are added benefits to CCUS, and certainly it could lead to a lot of jobs for all of us to, do something good and reduce our emissions. That's it for me.